In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 NHL games happening on February 2nd, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released, so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 NHL games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. New York Islanders versus Washington Capitals. This matchup feels like a personality clash, with one side treating hockey like project management and the other treating it like a mood swing. New York leans into that control style, sitting with the stronger record, ranking third in the league in goals against per game, near the very top in team save percentage, and piling up more shutouts than anyone else this season. The way they do it is not glamorous, it is stubborn. They keep shot counts low, often holding both their own attempts and their opponents' looks under 28 per night, and they are comfortable turning games into long stretches of board battles where nothing much seems to happen until a mistake finally does. If you have ever watched a game where you suddenly realize 5 minutes went by with the puck pinned along the wall, that is the exact kind of environment that suits them just fine. Washington leans on a different kind of appeal, especially at home, where the crowd, the building, and that reputation for offense create an impression that they are the more dangerous side. People see the recent comeback against Carolina, remember the big goals, and it naturally colors the way this matchup is framed. Underneath that, their profile sits much closer to the middle in both goals scored and goals allowed, and the results feel more like a soap opera than a spreadsheet, with a string of one-goal finishes, overtime drama, the odd shootout, and wild swings like 6-5 or 5-1 scattered through their schedule. Both teams skate into this one on the second night of a back-to-back, which adds that little layer of human fatigue that numbers never quite capture. New York is coming off a late collapse at home that snapped a 4-game heater where they had outscored opponents by a combined 16-4, so there is probably a touch of sting and focus in that room. Washington is coming off a rally from 3 goals down against a division rival, which is thrilling in the moment but has a way of emptying the emotional tank the next day. Reading that kind of intangible is always speculative, yet it matters in tight divisional games where every small edge gets magnified. The context around the rosters quietly leans in one direction too. Washington is dealing with a banged-up blue line and a crease that has both of its top options on the injury report, which pushes depth goalies and replacement defenders into bigger roles than originally planned. New York's main core remains largely intact aside from some depth pieces up front, so their identity does not need to change much. They can just keep leaning on that structured, defense-first template that has been working. When a road team with that kind of stability runs into a home team that is talented but streaky and patched together on the back end, and when that road team is perfectly happy to slow the game down and make every shift feel like work, the path to which side handles the number better becomes a little clearer. As our first pick for this matchup, the New York Islanders money line is our full game side pick. Oddsmakers have posted a relatively high bar and then shaded the under, which is a pretty good hint that they expect public money to lean toward goals. Recent box scores definitely give that crowd some ammo, since Washington's last 5 games have finished with combined totals of 7, 6, 11, and 4 goals, while New York's last 5 have landed on 7, 3, 7, 4, and 5. Those sequences flirt with the number in both directions, so they do not force anything by themselves. They mostly show that these teams are capable of chaos, but also capable of tight, quieter nights. The broader season arc for New York points more toward calm than chaos. They allow only 2.69 goals per game, which places them third in the league in that category. They sit third in team save percentage, and they lead the NHL in shutouts. Their style keeps games in low-event territory, with shot counts for and against often tucked under 28, which naturally drags totals toward the middle, not the extremes. It is like watching a chess player who refuses to trade queens early. Everything stays on the board longer, and wild swings are rarer. Washington brings more raw scoring, averaging 3.18 goals per game and giving up almost 3, so their average night looks a bit noisier. The issue is that their defense and goaltending groups are chewed up by injuries right now, and that tends to change how coaches think, especially on a back-to-back. Benches usually get shortened, instructions get simpler, and the message leans toward keep it in front of you, manage the puck, rather than stretch the ice at every chance. That reaction is speculative by nature, yet it fits what teams often do when the legs are heavy and the depth chart on the back end is patched together. Put that together with New York's comfort in low-tempo games and you get a matchup where long, grinding shifts are more likely than pond hockey rushes. Washington's recent high-scoring wins have often come from late surges and dramatic swings rather than 40 or 60 minutes of end-to-end trading chances, and that kind of script does not always repeat, especially against a team that specializes in slowing momentum. In a divisional game where both sides are chasing precious playoff space, the ice often tilts toward caution, line changes get a little quicker, and risk tolerance drops just a bit. That mix points more often to final scores in the 3-2 or 4-2 neighborhood than to another night where the combined number climbs into the 7 or 8 range. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Buffalo Sabres versus Florida Panthers. A few seasons ago, if you told anyone that Buffalo would roll into Sunrise in early February carrying a better record than the two-time defending champs from Florida, you probably would have gotten a pretty strange look. Yet here it sits, with the Sabres at 31-18-5 and the Panthers at 28-23-3, and Buffalo actually ahead of Florida in that Atlantic traffic jam and right in the mix for playoff positioning. The season series is even so far, one win each, which gives this game a bit of that rubber match feel that fans love and bettors quietly obsess over. Buffalo does not really feel like the old fun but flaky Sabres anymore. It feels more like a team that has finally learned how to play adult hockey without losing its spark. They score a little north of 3 goals a night, keep their goals against closer to the 2-something range than the 3-something range, and they have turned close games late into something pretty comfortable for anyone holding a Sabres ticket. When they lead after 2 periods, they have that air of a group that knows how to shut a door instead of leaving it half open and hoping the wind is kind. A huge part of that vibe lives in the crease with Alex Lyon, the goalie who once helped push this very Florida franchise into the postseason and is now on the other side of the handshake line. Lyon comes in leading Buffalo in wins, sitting at 13 victories with only 7 regulation losses and 3 in extra time, rocking a goals against in the mid-2s and a save percentage north of .91, which is not just hot week territory, it is, this might actually be who he is right now territory. He just set a franchise mark with 10 straight wins, then had that run snapped in a tight loss to Montreal where he still kept Buffalo in it while the Post did him no favors. If you have ever sweated a third period with money on the line, you know how different it feels rooting for a team whose goalie actually calms you down instead of sending you looking for antacids. Florida, on the other hand, looks a little more human than people are used to seeing from a recent dynasty, and there is a bit of nervous energy in the way their last week has gone. They come into this one on a 3-game skid, all 1-goal losses, capped by that 2-1 defeat at home to Winnipeg where they had a lead and still watched it slip away late on their own ice. You can almost feel the frustration in those quotes after the game. The classic, we are right there, but not quite there type of talk that sounds fine once, and a lot less fine when it stretches into a full week of results. The roster picture feeds into that story. On Buffalo's side, names like Rasmus Dahlin, Tage Thompson, and Alex Tuch are all on the active roster, all available, and none of them show up on today's injury list, which means the Sabres bring their full core into a statement-type matchup. For Florida, the headline pieces are different than they used to be, but the key ones we are talking about here are Sam Reinhart and Sergei Bobrovsky, who are both active, while Brad Marchand and Anton Lundell are sitting in that annoying day-to-day bucket, and Seth Jones and Jonah Gadjovich sit on injured reserve, still watching instead of playing. Their longtime captain Alexander Barkov is out long-term after knee surgery, which hangs over everything Florida does and forces other players into roles that are just a little bigger than the team probably drew up back in camp. When you stack that up, one side feels more whole, the other feels a bit patched together. Current form tilts the same way. Buffalo just had a 5-game heater snapped by Montreal, but they are 7-2-1 over their last 10, and that stretch includes that loud 7-4 win in Toronto with Dahlin's hat trick and a string of games where they simply handled business night after night. Florida walks into this one 2-3 in their last 5, with the 3 most recent all-tight losses and the building starting to feel a little less like a fortress and a little more like a place where teams believe they can steal points. Psychologically, it is hard to ignore the contrast between a Sabres group that has gone on a 20-3-1 heater since early December and looks like it expects good things to happen, and a Panthers group fighting through injuries and a small crisis of confidence while trying to live up to championship banners. Market-wise, the interesting wrinkle is that Florida is still treated like the default favorite at home, priced as the slightly stronger side because history and banners tend to hang around in people's minds a lot longer than last week's shot chart. So you end up with a matchup where one team brings the better record, the hotter goalie, healthier stars, and the recent form edge, yet still gets framed as the riskier side, which is exactly the kind of small disconnect that people look for when they are hunting for value. Honestly, if you like skating with the group that is locking down third periods, riding a confident netminder, and playing like it has something to prove instead of something to protect, your decision on which bench to trust for the money line pretty much writes itself. As our first pick for this matchup, the Buffalo Sabres money line is our full game side pick. Buffalo's profile is sneaky friendly for people who lean toward lower scores. They score a bit over 3 goals per game and give up a bit under 3, but they do it while taking only around 28 shots a night and leaning on a penalty kill that sits comfortably in the low 80s. That combination, fewer shots and a very steady kill, is like turning the volume down on the chaos. It keeps games from getting too stretched out unless something truly weird happens. Recent results back that up, with most of their last handful landing on the lower side of the posted number, even with that 7-4 fireworks show in Toronto mixed in as the obvious exception that people remember more than the quieter 2-1 and 4-2 types of nights. If you have ever checked your phone mid-game and thought, wow, they only have 22 shots, that is the kind of pacing Buffalo has been living in. Florida's story is different, but it still nudges toward fewer goals. Overall, they sit around 3 goals for and a bit over 3 against on the season, but the detail that really jumps out is that they allow only about 26 shots a game, one of the stingier shot suppression profiles in the league. That is the kind of defensive shell that can soak up pressure, and when it is working, it turns games into long stretches of board battles and point shots that hit shin pads. The problem lately has been on the other end, with the attack looking cramped, especially with Marchand and Lundell banged up, Jones out on the blue line, Gadjovich sidelined, and Barkov watching from the press box instead of driving play down the middle. You saw it clearly in that 2-1 loss to Winnipeg, where they scored first, then struggled to generate clean chances as the game tightened and the injuries showed up in their forward rotation. Head-to-head, these two have quietly been more about chess than pinball for a while now. The recent over-under record between them leans heavily toward the lower side, including that 3-0 Buffalo win in October and the 4-3 Florida win in January, with one game landing clearly below the number and the other just creeping into the higher range. And if you zoom in on games with Buffalo visiting Florida, trends from the betting sites show a string of unders stacking up, which suggests that when these teams meet in this building, the ice tends to tilt toward tighter hockey, not wide-open shinny. It is the kind of pattern that is easy to brush off once or twice, but 10 games in a row of mostly modest scores starts to look less like coincidence and more like two coaching staffs that are very comfortable dragging each other into a grind. Factor in a likely goaltending matchup that features Lyon on one side and Bobrovsky on the other, both active and both in good enough form to make shooters think twice, and you get a game script that naturally leans toward 5 or maybe 6 total goals instead of a 7 or 8 goal fireworks display. Buffalo is content to protect a lead behind a hot goalie and a strong kill. Florida is short a few important forwards and trying to stop the bleeding by playing cleaner, more careful hockey, and the combination usually means every shot feels a little heavier and every lane is a little more clogged. So while the board hints at the possibility of a wild one, the current form, the injuries, the way these two have played each other, and the style both benches are leaning into right now all quietly point toward a total that stays on the conservative side rather than breaking into true shootout territory. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Ottawa Senators versus Pittsburgh Penguins. Puck in Pittsburgh tonight feels like one of those games that looks like a coin flip on the board but does not really play like one when you actually walk through who these teams are right now. Ottawa comes in at 26-21-7, riding that 3-game home surge against Vegas, Colorado, and New Jersey where they owned the goal tally 16-4, and that kind of week changes how a room carries itself. Across the way, the home side sits at 28-14-11, second in the Metro, and they are on a 6-game heater that has felt more like a victory lap than a survival act, with recent scorelines of 6, 6, 3, 6, and 4 goals for, which is a lot of we can beat you any way you want to play. Style-wise, the contrast is almost storybook. Pittsburgh plays the more grown-up version of hockey right now, around 3.4 goals scored per night and under 3 allowed, with a power play sitting in the high 20% range and a penalty kill living in the mid-80s, both grading out comfortably in the top tier of the league this season, not as some nostalgia act. Ottawa is the chaos machine, still dangerous, scoring roughly 3.3 a game but giving up just over 3.2, pairing a top 10 power play in that low to mid-20s band with a penalty kill that sits near the bottom of the standings, parked around the low 70s and ranked 30th, which is the defensive version of leaving your front door open in winter. Every name you care about here is actually available, which matters if you have ever been burned by a surprise morning skate tweet. Sidney Crosby, Tim Stutzel, Brady Tkachuk, Dylan Cozens, Linus Ullmark, Stuart Skinner, and Artur Silovs are all on these current rosters and not on today's official injury reports. And they are expected to go unless something breaks very late that has not been reported yet. Where the absences actually show up is around them. Ottawa is dealing with David Perrin on injured reserve after sports hernia surgery, and Thomas Chabot just left the last game for what the team called precautionary reasons with that wrist or hand scare, so his status is being watched closely. Pittsburgh's blue line and supporting cast are even more dented, with Chris Letang on injured reserve with a fractured foot, Ryan Graves sidelined, Jack St. Ivany and Caleb Jones out, and Brian Rust serving a suspension, which is a long list even for a team that has spent a decade living in next-man-up mode. Here is the thing, though those injuries do not hurt both teams in the same way. Ottawa already has one of the softest penalty kills in the league, and now that unit has to walk into PPG Paints Arena and stare down a home power play that ranks top 3 in efficiency, and a penalty kill that sits top 5, so their biggest structural weak point runs straight into Pittsburgh's biggest current edge. You can almost picture the coaching meetings, one side talking about stay out of the box like it is a wish, the other side calmly designing set plays around face-off wins and Royal Road seams. The goaltending story adds another layer that looks small on paper but feels big in a single game. Ottawa is almost certainly going back to Ullmark after he returned from that personal leave and stopped 26 of 27 against New Jersey, which is exactly the kind of calm performance you would want from him. But it is still just one game after a month away, and projecting that as automatic form is a bit like assuming your car runs forever because it started perfectly this morning. On the other end, Pittsburgh has settled into a very steady tandem reality with Skinner and Silovs, sitting in that 2.7 to 3.0 goals against pocket with save percentages around the high .88 to mid .89 range. Numbers that are not poster material but look a lot better when they are backed by a top 10 defensive environment that already limits chances against. Home ice quietly tilts things further. The Penguins are 13-7 in this building, which reads like a team that may cough up the odd extra time point but usually gets something out of the night at home. The Senators are 12-11 on the road, with those away games averaging 3.5 goals scored and 3.77 allowed, which is another way of saying their road identity is fun, dangerous, and occasionally reckless. Those numbers are not just trivia, they tell you who is more comfortable dictating the terms in this matchup, especially when the building gets loud and special teams start taking over big chunks of the clock. Even without quoting any odds, you can feel how the market has inched toward trusting the more complete team here, still treating the game like a close one but nudging the price toward the home side. When you put all the pieces together, current special teams edge, steadier defensive profile, that 6-game form, Ullmark still 1 game removed from his leave, and the way Ottawa's most glaring weakness lines up almost perfectly with Pittsburgh's favorite weapon, the clearest path through all the noise runs straight through the home locker room on the money line, with the obvious reminder that even the sharpest angle is still probability and not prophecy. As our first pick for this matchup, the Pittsburgh Penguins money line is our full game side pick. If you just look at the baseline, these two offenses combine for roughly 6.73 goals per night, 3.4 from Pittsburgh and 3.33 from Ottawa, and that is before you even talk about what they have been up to lately, which is where things start to feel a little bit wild. Ottawa just wrapped that homestand where they dropped 4, 5, and 7 in 3 straight wins on Vegas, Colorado, and New Jersey, finishing that stretch with a 16-4 edge. And that is exactly the kind of run that gives a team permission to lean into its offensive personality even more. On the road, they have been one of the more entertaining teams in the league, scoring 91 and giving up 98 in 26 away dates, which works out to an average of 3.5 scored and almost 3.8 allowed, and those are not the kind of numbers that scream tight and sleepy. Pittsburgh, on its side of the ledger, has been putting on a mini-scoring festival of its own. Over the last 5, they have put up scorelines of 6-5, 6-2, 3-2, 6-2, and 4-1, 25 goals for and 12 against, which lands the typical game total right around that comfortable 7-goal neighborhood where over tickets either cash or at least get a good sweat. That stretch is not an accident either. This is a group currently averaging in the mid-3s offensively while sitting under 3 allowed. So when the offense heats up like this, the scoreboard tends to follow, especially when their power play is firing. If you zoom out from the raw totals and think about the way these two teams actually chase offense, it fits the script for a high-tempo night. Ottawa leans hard into its creativity and edge, with Stützle driving play, Tkachuk camping out in the blue paint stirring things up, and Cozens giving them another legitimate scoring center, so when they are in rhythm they look like a team that is perfectly happy to trade chances. The problem, for them at least, is that they dragged the league's 30th ranked penalty kill into a building where Crosby and that top 3 power play live, converting in the high 20% range, which is exactly the combination that tends to turn minor penalties into 3-goal periods. On the flip side, Pittsburgh's defensive injuries, Letang, Graves, St. Ivany, Jones, plus Rust missing up front, leave their back end thinner than the logo suggests, and that invites Ottawa's rush game and their heavy point shot and net front chaos approach to generate their own looks, especially with a coach in Travis Green who is not exactly wired to park the bus and hope for a 2-1 grind. There is a little contradiction built in there. Pittsburgh's structure has been one of the better ones in the league, yet tonight that structure is being held together without some of its most trusted pieces, which is how you end up with high-quality chances at both ends even when the overall system is sound. The expected matchup in goal does not really scream automatic shutdown either. Ullmark is the likely starter again for Ottawa after that sharp 26-save return versus the Devils, and he has been living in that just under 3 goals against and high .88 to low .89 save percentage world this season, which is solid, but not suffocating, and he is still only 1 outing removed from his personal leave. Across the ice, Pittsburgh will roll with either Skinner or Silovs, both also sitting in that 2.7 to 3.0 range with save percentages right around the .89 neighborhood, which again is respectable but not the kind of profile that scares you off goals when you factor in who is shooting on them. In a strange way, the goaltending here feels stable enough to avoid complete meltdown, yet open enough that quality chances should actually show up on the scoreboard rather than just in the shot attempts column. Pricing in the market has leaned a little bit toward a lower scoring outcome, which is usually what happens when you have one strong defensive resume involved, but the combination in this matchup is unusual. 2 top 10 power plays, 1 bottom level penalty kill, key injuries on both blue lines, recent game flows living in that 7 to 9 goal window, and 2 offenses that have every reason to keep their foot down right now rather than play it safe. If we are going to be wrong, it feels far more natural to be wrong-siding with 2 hot attacks and a shaky penalty kill in a confidence game than to be wrong because both benches suddenly decided to turn this into a low-event chess match for 60 minutes, which none of the recent evidence really suggests. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Montreal Canadiens versus Minnesota Wild. Montreal rolls into Minnesota for this matchup on Monday, February 2, 2026, feeling pretty pleased with itself after a very lively stretch of hockey. The Canadiens have stacked 3 wins in a row, including that 7-goal outburst against Colorado that felt less like a grind and more like a team enjoying the game again. They followed it with a clean, grown-up road win in Buffalo, which is the kind of result that tells you they are not just freelancing offense, they are actually stringing together real structure with that swagger. There is also that recent little mental edge tucked in there, because Montreal already found a way to solve Minnesota once this season in that 4-3 home win back on January 20th. When you have already beaten a team, you do not stare across the red line and see a giant, you see a very beatable opponent that you have already figured out at least once. It does not mean a repeat is automatic, but it changes how boldly you play in those first 10 minutes, and that matters more than people admit when the nerves are loud and the building is buzzing. Oddsmakers, though, are still very clearly giving the nod to the home side, and they are not doing it out of nostalgia. The way the prices lean toward Minnesota tells you the market trusts the bigger picture, the home ice, and the underlying profile far more than that one hiccup in Montreal. That broader profile really does carry weight because Minnesota sits on a record in the neighborhood of 32 to 14 to 10, with home numbers around 16 to 6 to 7, and that is not the resume of a pretend contender. The goal differential up in the mid-20s on the plus side paints the same picture, a team that usually wins its minutes rather than hoping to steal games late. The recent form backs that up with some style points. Minnesota has been on a 3-game heater, part of a longer run that looks like 6 to 3 to 1 over their last 10, and the way they have done it is what jumps off the page. They have clawed back against Chicago, punched early against Calgary, and dropped 7 on Edmonton for good measure, which shows they can live in a tight, patient script or a wide-open track meet without their shape falling apart. That kind of versatility is like having 2 different clubs in the bag for the same shot. You can decide on the fly whether to lean on tempo or structure. Scheduling also gives the home team a quiet little boost. Minnesota comes back to its own rink after that swing that included Edmonton, while Montreal keeps grinding through a road stretch after the Buffalo stop on January 31st. Travel does not magically win games, of course, but it nudges the energy bar down a notch, and that often shows up in small details like board battles or line changes. Fold in the revenge angle after dropping the first meeting, the comfort of home routines, and the trust the market is already placing in them, and the weight of the evidence leans toward Minnesota being the side that is more likely to handle its business across 60 minutes, especially if this one tightens up late. As our first pick for this matchup, the Minnesota Wild money line is our full game side pick. Everything on the surface seems to shout that we should be bracing for fireworks. Montreal's season has stacked up with goals on both sides of the ledger, 191 scored and 182 allowed through 55 games, which lands you in that neighborhood of almost 7 combined goals on an average night when you mash it all together. Minnesota is not shy either, with 186 for and 161 against in 56 games, a profile that settles a little above 6 combined. When you layer on the recent scorelines, it feels like someone forgot to tell these teams there is a goalie involved. Montreal has been rolling through games that end 3-2, 7-3, and 4-2. Minnesota has answered with 4-3, 4-1, and 7-3 wins of its own. Those numbers read more like someone's favorite video game than a conservative mid-season grind. Books have responded by lifting the bar on the projected total, and they have every reason to do so. The last time these two saw each other, the game raced up to 7 goals, yet the quieter side of the total has still cashed in 2 of the last 3 meetings. So there is this odd little tension between what the eye test of recent box scores suggests and what the longer run matchup history whispers in the background. Here is the thing, though both teams just played on January 31st, Montreal in Buffalo and Minnesota in Edmonton, and then both had to haul themselves into this one. That kind of quick turnaround usually trims benches a bit and nudges coaches toward simpler plans. You get more direct plays, safer decisions at the blue lines, and fewer risky stretch passes that turn into odd man rushes the other way. Anyone who has played even a casual beer league game on tired legs knows the instinct. You stop trying to win the night with highlight reel stuff and start playing the percentages just to survive your shifts. Minnesota's coaching staff already leans into an identity at home that is built on structure first and flair second. You can see it in that stingier goals against column and that strong home record, where they tend to turn games into controlled, measured efforts rather than wild back and forth chaos. Montreal, for all the recent scoring fun, is still the road team walking into a loud building, and there is a natural pull toward keeping things contained, silencing the crowd early, and avoiding the kind of end-to-end trading that can flip momentum in a heartbeat. So even with both offenses humming, the context points toward a tighter, more managed kind of game, something that lives closer to that 6-goal neighborhood, where every mistake feels big, rather than a runaway total that blows past the number with time to spare. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Detroit Red Wings versus Colorado Avalanche. 2 nights ago, this matchup already gave us a pretty loud preview, with Colorado rolling into Detroit and walking out with a 5-0 statement that felt more like a message than a mid-season game. That kind of scoreline sticks, not just because of the margin, but because of how it happened, with Colorado dictating tempo, using its speed through the neutral zone, and making it look like every small Detroit mistake turned into a chance going the other way. Now everything flips, and the same teams meet again, only this time it is at altitude, with that thin Denver air that has humbled visiting skaters for years, the crowd behind the home bench, and a building where Colorado has turned home ice into something close to a fortress this season, both in results and in how confident they look shift by shift. Colorado has built that identity on more than one superstar carrying the load. The way their top players are driving this season, with their main center playing like he is in video game mode and their top pair replacements stepping in with real poise, you can feel how comfortable they are leaning into their strengths at home. That includes a blue line that moves the puck quickly, a forecheck that arrives in waves, and a coaching staff that clearly trusts its group enough to roll lines instead of shortening the bench at the first sign of trouble. Even the depth stories matter here, like the smooth right shot defender earning a fresh multi-year extension, which is the kind of vote of confidence that usually reflects what the team is seeing day after day rather than just one hot week. The injury picture is not perfect, but it is familiar, which oddly helps them. They have been skating without their captain and a key top pair defender for a stretch now, so the group has already adjusted to life without those pieces, and their systems are built with that reality in mind rather than hoping for last-minute miracles. A new wing acquisition sitting in that day-to-day gray area adds a bit of uncertainty on the margins, but the backbone of the team, that fast, aggressive, high-skill core, is very much intact, and the results so far have backed that up. Detroit, on the other hand, arrives in a much better place than in recent seasons, and that matters when you talk about mindset. A record in the low 30s for wins, with losses and overtime results spread out in the teens, is a big step forward for a team that has been grinding through a long rebuild. The core looks legit now, with a captain who drives play, clever young wingers who can score in bunches, a veteran star who has revitalized his career, and a hard minutes defender who gives them both snarl and structure from the back end. On the road they have been respectable too, comfortably above water, which tells you they do not completely fall apart when the matchups tilt against them. Still, the recent stretch has started to show some cracks, and not just on the scoreboard. A point streak snapped against a heavy, structured Kings team, then a shootout loss to Washington on a night that should have been all celebration, and then that 5-0 shutout at home to this very Colorado squad. That sequence can sap a bit of swagger. It is not that Detroit suddenly became bad, it is that the margin for error has shrunk again, especially with injuries kicking in at the wrong spots. The biggest bruise for them right now sits on the back end, with their talented young defender on injured reserve and not expected back until after the Olympic break, which forces everybody behind him up a chair. That means more responsibility for a veteran left shot who has just earned a new extension, more stress on the top pair anchored by their franchise right shot, and more minutes for depth pieces who are better suited to sheltered roles than to taking on top competition on the road in a tough building. Then there is the crease, which is always the wild card in a single hockey game. Detroit looks likely to turn again to their experienced goaltender, who has had a nice bounce-back season with a strong record and a goals against average sitting in the mid-2s and a solid save percentage. Yet he was also the one who just got pulled after that rough night in the first meeting. Colorado, in contrast, has been getting steady work from its tandem, with one netminder already registering that shutout in Detroit and the other providing a similarly calm, economical style that fits perfectly behind a team that limits clean looks. When you stack all of that together, the home ice advantage at altitude, the high-end talent that is already rolling, the defensive structure that travels but really shines in their own rink, and a Detroit blue line that is missing a key piece, it becomes pretty clear which side has the more reliable path to covering its side in this rematch, even if hockey always leaves room for chaos. As our first pick for this matchup, the Colorado Avalanche money line is our full game side pick. Colorado sits near the top of the league in goals scored. That part matches the reputation, yet they are also right at the front when it comes to keeping the puck out of their own net. The numbers around goals against per game and the number of shutouts they have collected tell you that this is not just a team trading chances and hoping their stars save them. It is a team that can squeeze the life out of you when it wants to. At home, that shows up even more clearly, with opponents often stuck on 2 or fewer goals, the crowd feeding off every block shot, and the third period becoming a bit of a grind for visiting skaters whose legs are starting to feel the altitude press on them. That 5-0 meeting in Detroit was not some fluky track meet. It was another example of Colorado turning a game into a one-way street and then locking the door on the other end. Detroit brings a different style, and right now circumstance is nudging them in a more conservative direction. Losing a key young defender until after the Olympic break has nudged their coaching staff toward a more careful road template, one that leans heavily on their big-minute right shot and that newly extended veteran partner, with everyone else told to keep things simple and avoid trading rush chances. You can see it in the recent scoreboard pattern, a 3-1 type of game here, a tight 4-3 shootout there, and that 5-0 result. These are not free-flowing pond hockey contests. They are games where a few mistakes decide everything. And there is also the rhythm of a quick home and home to consider, which often drags the scoring down slightly as both teams build a fresh memory bank of tendencies, breakout patterns, and preferred entries. Once you have just played a team, the surprise factor fades, and coaching staffs become more comfortable matching specific lines, leaning into certain neutral zone looks, and taking away favorite plays on the power play and penalty kill. Layer the travel into Denver on top of that, where visiting legs tend to feel fine early then heavy late, and you often get that strange profile where the first period has some chances both ways and then the ice starts to tilt, but the game still does not explode in terms of total scoring. Colorado themselves have been talking recently about tightening up defensively after some messy, high-scoring road nights, which usually translates into more conservative pinches, cleaner line changes, and a bit less risk from the back end when protecting any sort of lead. Even if that urge to attack is still in their DNA, the combination of a strong defensive record, confident goaltending, and a coaching emphasis on structure naturally points away from a wild shootout script and towards something more measured. The most realistic sketches for this kind of rematch often land in that 3-2 or 4-2 neighborhood, enough offense for it to feel lively but not so much that it turns into a circus, which is very different from the high-scoring fantasy many casual bettors like to imagine when they see Colorado on the schedule. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.